expectation about this opera, that there be a gingerbread house. Well, there is no gingerbread house in this production. So if that's your assumption or expectation, guess what? The last little point of contact I want to mention is the very ending of the story. And I'm going to read first the 1812 version, that first published version, and then talk a bit about the opera. So we all know the story at this point. The witch has been fattening up Hansel because she's going to eat him. She comes in periodically and checks to see if he's been gaining weight. What does she do? Well, she pokes his finger. The witch is blind, she can't see, and Gretel has smuggled in a chicken bone, which Hansel holds out. So the blind witch pokes on the finger. No, you're not quite fat enough. Anybody know how much time passes? How long they're in the witch's house? 1 month. 1 month. Every day she checks him, not fat enough. So eventually the witch says, I'm tired of waiting. Gretel, get the oven ready. Gretel, being a smart child, says, I don't know how to do it. Can you show me? Well, this is a very important element in most folk tales. The show me how something is done. There are instances in stories from India where a villain asks someone to dance on the edge of a cauldron. And we get one person who says, I don't know what you want me to do. Okay, fine, I'll demonstrate it. They dance on the edge of the cauldron, bloop, in they go. So, here we have 1812. The old woman sat on the board, so there's a board by the oven, and since she was light, Gretel pushed her all the way inside, and then quickly closed the door and secured it with an iron bar. The old woman in the hot oven began to cry and wail, but Gretel ran away, and the old woman burned up miserably. Gretel ran to Hansel and unlocked his door. He jumped out and they kissed each other and were overjoyed. The whole house was filled with precious stones and pearls. Wait a minute, precious stones and pearls? They filled their pockets, then ran away and found their way back home. The father rejoiced when he saw them once more, for he had not had a happy day since they had been gone, and now he was a rich man. By the way, the mother had died. So that's 1812. That's it. In the opera, a very different kind of tone emerges, and this reflects a shift in social and cultural and moral values. Late 19th century Germany was rampant with pietism, and this opera is full of references to God and to a divine being. Now, to be fair, there are references to that in later versions of the Grimm story as they published it, and those were added on. But it's very common in this opera to get these references. I would maybe suggest that in the absence of their biological father, they appeal to a different father. I don't know. But this is the end of the opera. So the children are in the house, the witch's house. The parents come back, and the father says, if only our children were here. Oh, there they are. Here are the poor sinners. Why are they sinners? The father says that. And the line in German, or the word in German, is Sünderchen, which means little sinners. Then we get at the end a little parable, a moral. This is aimed at all the kids out there, so pay attention. Observe heaven's punishment. Bad deeds don't last long. When our need is at its greatest, God our Lord bends down to us. Yes, when our need is at its greatest, God our Lord holds out his hand. Now that's in one translation. In our translation, we get something a little bit different, but the same kind of intent. When a child cries out in fear, someone somewhere surely has got to hear. For when in need or dark despair, surely God will hear your prayer. That's very different than the ending of that 1812 version, right? Where we just simply get well, it's over, right? We've got pearls, we've got jewels, the father is wealthy, oh, and by the way, the mother's dead. So the process of taking this story and transferring it from a literary medium, or originally an oral medium, to a literary medium, and then finally to a musical medium, is full of questioning our assumptions and expectations. It's a lot about compromise, including things and leaving things out. So I would ask today, as you watch this opera, check your assumptions and expectations and be pleasantly surprised by what you see. Now, I've got time for questions, so have at it. Yes? Yes, her question was about the stepmother, and at some point she became, or the mother, and at some point she became a stepmother. That's true, and that's about the middle of all of these different versions that the Grimm brothers produced. As far as it being politically correct, I'm not sure that we really know why that happened. It may very well be that the Grimms had such a loving relationship with their own mother that to portray a mother in a bad light was not thought of as being quite acceptable. Also, I would suggest too, there's the issue of infant mortality and of death rates, and people dying and remarrying. And so the stepmother is a part of what people were used to. So there are probably several different reasons for that. Raise it on. Yeah, yes. Yes. Her question was about whether this opera is in 2 acts or 3 acts. It's actually in 3 acts, but it's common to link the first and second act together. So what you'll have is acts 1 and 2 presented without break, and then an intermission and act 3. And you had a question right in front. Yes?
Did you comment on the lullaby?
On the lullaby. Well, there's another example of that kind of pious parable. Is there something in particular you wanted to know about it? Yes, it is just in the opera, although it's one of those things that has become so much a part of how we think of the story that we assume it's always been there. In the Grimm stories, there are references to helpers, and at one point the children are led to the witch's house by some doves. But there's no reference necessarily to angels as such in any of the stories, and certainly not 14 of them. Yes?
Is the writing above going to be in English, or is it going to be in German? They're singing in English.
Excellent question. Is the writing above the supertitles or subtitles going to be in English or German? This production is in English, and you will get English supertitles. Yes. Yes, sir.
This one focuses greatly on gluttony.
Yes.
Now, how did that get involved? Did it start off that way, or is it part of the metamorphosis?
Again, another excellent question. The emphasis on gluttony. An important part of this story from its beginning is the lack of food. And when the children first encounter this house, initially, they're a bit reluctant to eat because, of course, they've never had food. Over time, as the story evolves throughout the 19th century, it begins to take on less and less reluctance to eat. They actually enjoy what they're eating. So I think it's a natural extension, as we see in this production, to go from a reluctance when you've had nothing to now a kind of a surfeit of food and resources, and the downside of having too much. So I think the gluttony aspect is maybe an underlying theme, but one that we maybe not have thought too much about.
Sort of comedic, going to the ridiculous extreme?
Oh, I don't know if it's going to the ridiculous. I think it's maybe one of those aspects of human behavior that we might not think about until somebody points it out to us. I mean, if you've gone your entire life without having food, once somebody gives you lots of food, what are you going to do? Well, you may not want to at first, but nobody says no. Well, sure, let's have at it. Did you have
Could you say a few words about the composer?
Yes, a few words about the composer. Just to clarify, this is not the same man who recorded Please Release Me. They just share the same name, yes. Our composer, Humperdinck, died in 1921. The other Humperdinck was born 15 years later, so that's why it would be impossible. Engelbert Humperdinck, the composer. What to say about this man? He was universally loved. He was just a nice guy. He was very talented from an early age, showed great promise as a pianist and as a composer. Eventually, he became a disciple of Wagner, and he was involved in the very first production of Parsifal. Some have questioned whether he's a one-hit wonder. This is his best-known opera. He wrote other operas after this. A terrific work by Humperdinck I would recommend checking out if you get a chance is called Königskinder, which is based on the Goose Girl story. His music has elements of Wagner in it, and there are sections of this opera that sound quite a bit to my ear like Meistersinger. But at the same time, he incorporates these tunes, either original or man-made, that sound very folky. So it's an interesting mix of sort of dense orchestral writing, a very thick orchestration, some complex harmonies, but not anything that would tax your ear, and these wonderful little folk melodies. So it's a kind of a curious mix. Yes, sir.
When did Hansel become a female role?
Hansel has always been a female role. Yes, yes. Now, I don't know, maybe somebody here has the question, why is this never done with children in the role, right? Well, actually there was a recording made in 1974 where they had kids sing these roles, and it was a mess. This is very difficult music. Yeah. It's very hard for adults to sing, and when you see the orchestra down there, which is a large, large group, it's difficult for young singers to project over that. Now, it works on recording because you've got microphones, but this opera has always been intended for adult voices, and Hansel has always been sung by a mezzo.
When did the witch become a man?
When did the witch become a man? Well, that's a little more recent. In this production, and also a production at Glyndebourne, the witch is sung by a tenor. That, I don't have an exact date or I can't pinpoint when that really happened. It's become more common in the past 10 or 15 years. There's nothing to indicate that it can't be sung by a tenor, other than the fact that it's very high, and a lot of tenors don't want to be bothered with that. But traditionally, it's been sung by a mezzo.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there a question over? Yes.
Some while back, I became familiar with the Schulte version on DVD, which is quite enjoyable. It's rustic, and it sort of seems to be the right atmosphere.
Right.
At the Glyndebourne, which I attended, it became the gingerbread house became a supermarket.
Yes.
And the whole situation seemed to be bizarrely modernized. I couldn't enjoy it, to be frank.
Right.
By the way, before the Glyndebourne performance, there were several of Humperdinck's string quartets played.
Right.
So you were quite a lot of small-scale music too.
Right. Well, in this production, the gingerbread house is also modernized. I think what you get is a directorial sense that the stories that are, or the themes that are discussed in this story, hunger, abandonment, gluttony, those are all things that are timeless and are maybe themes that deserve to be treated with a bit more seriousness than just simply throwing up a gingerbread house. So in this particular production, what you'll see is a very industrial-looking kitchen. I happen to think it works really well, and what I like about this particular production is that we, for once, start to get a witch who actually has some kind of threat. I mean, there's a comic aspect to it, but the witch should be threatening. And in this production, and I think also in the Glyndebourne, just because of that sort of bizarre element, the witch really does pose a real danger, and there's a moral there, right? Remember? Don't ever talk to strangers. Stranger danger. Don't take candy from strangers. So that's all, again, part of what goes into this story. My time is up, but I will be hanging around.